Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Jason Rojas. I'm the Chief of Staff to President Burger Sweeney here at Trinity College. And I also happen to serve as the House Majority Leader in the Connecticut General Assembly. I'm going to be the moderator for tonight's event. I'm really excited to be here with my colleagues. Despite being the only Democrat and hosting a forum with 3 Republicans, I feel very comfortable about the conversation we're about to have here. So what I'll do quickly is introduce our panelists, and I'll begin with Damaris Claridis, who served in the Connecticut House of Representatives representing Derby, Orange, and Woodbridge. She was first elected in 1998, rose through the ranks of the House Republican Caucus to become House Minority Leader from 2015 to 2021. She was the highest ranking woman in the legislature and is the first woman to lead the House Republican Caucus in state history. Our next panelist is George Logan. George served 2 terms in the Connecticut State Senate from 2017 to 2021. Most recently, he was the Republican nominee for Connecticut's 5th Congressional District in 2022. During his time in Hartford, he served as the ranking member of the Human Services Committee and the Veterans Affairs Committee, and in 2017, served as a Senate co-chair of the Planning and Development Committee. And he was a co-chair because that year, the Senate was actually tied, I think, for the first time in something like 100 years, and the House was 79-72, very close. But because the Senate was tied, we actually had Senate and Republican co-chairs, which really made for an interesting experience for all of us. I was the chair of another committee and had the same dynamic at play. But welcome, George. And our third panelist is Jane Swift. She began her career as an elected official in 1991 at the age of 25, when she was the youngest woman ever elected to the Massachusetts State Senate. She went on to hold executive level positions at the Massachusetts Port Authority and was appointed Consumer Affairs Secretary by then Governor Paul Cellucci. She was elected Lieutenant Governor in 1998 and became governor in 2001. She left public office in 2003 and has worked as an education executive with special expertise in educational technology. Welcome, Jane. And with those introductions over, we're going to get right into the questions. First question, I think, for everybody is, what inspired you to run for office, and what was your journey like? And I'll start with Jane.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I'm thrilled to be here. I think if there's anybody who went to college with me, they were surprised when I went into politics because I was not at all involved in student government. Took a little break from that when I was at Trinity, with one exception. The summer between my sophomore and junior years, I did an internship with my state senator. And that was because in my family, very working class family from the far northwestern corner of Massachusetts. My family ran a plumbing business. We had very clear sort of morals, standards, and things that were important in our family that my parents really instilled in all of us. First was a commitment to our family. Second was God. Sometimes my mom rearranged those depending what kind of mood she was in and how mad she was at us and what she wanted to threaten us with. And then came work or school, and then came a commitment to community. And my mom stayed at home once my older brother, who's a year older than me, was born, but she was the head of the PTA. She ran my Girl Scout troop. I always made the joke that when I ran for office, I ran because of my dad's involvement in politics. I won because of my mom's involvement in the community. But the truth is, my dad was involved. He had been appointed by a longtime Republican governor to the Housing Authority. He managed a state Senate campaign. And so during my childhood, it was normal for us to talk about politics around the table. My daughter, who's a senior now at Trinity, told me I was building cultural capital, something I didn't know existed. But really the reason I decided myself to run is because of the experience I had when I arrived at Trinity College, where I realized that our public education system is not as equal as I would have liked it to be. And despite the fact that in my little community in North Adams, I was this high flyer, found myself to be very prepared. When I got to Trinity, I realized that my education had not prepared me as well as many of my peers who had gone to private schools or much better financed public schools. And so we might talk about this if some of the questions come later, but my motivation, and Themis may talk about this as well, a lot of women run for this reason. It was really fueled by a passion for issues and to make a difference. And in my case, I believed really strongly, and I'm at the upper end of our family of 21 cousins, most of whom were also living in that little community in the Berkshires, that they should be able to go off to college and be just as prepared as their peers. And your preparation and your education shouldn't depend on what community you were born into or how wealthy your parents were. And so that propelled me into politics. And I was lucky that for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is probably my charm. That's a joke. I probably more than my work ethic, but I won that first race and am really lucky to have had some leadership experiences that I treasure.
Thank you. Themis.
Well, people have heard me tell this story a million times, and Jason, I know you're probably sick of it. I came from an immigrant family that immigrated from Greece, fled a genocide, and came to this country for that American dream. So I grew up in a middle class family that grew their own business. We grew up in a family business. My grandfather, my uncle started his own little market ice cream parlor, as families do. They fought, and my grandfather got stuck with the market, and he built that up with my dad and my uncles. And so we grew up in a place where you worked really hard, you were honest with people, and you treated people fairly. And so even though I didn't have anybody political in my family, except my uncle who ran for a local board of finance, my family was very involved in the community, and they always taught us to give back. And because they had so many opportunities in the place that we grew up, and similar to Jane, I grew up in a very middle-class area, and a lot of those education opportunities and other opportunities weren't the same as more affluent parts of the state. So for me, my parents taught us give back however you want. I decided I liked politics. I had a little bit of an interest in it. I ended up going to law school, so I had that background also. And a friend of mine one day said to me, Themis, there's a state rep seat, and the woman that's in it is running for something else. You should think of running for it. And I go, I don't even know what it is. I don't know what it is. I don't know the towns. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how to do any of it. And, we just kind of talked it through. We started doing a little research, and we talked to the people we needed to talk to. And, no matter how hard you work and how great you are, or how great you think you are, you need a little bit of luck. And it was a very difficult race for me. It got national attention for numerous reasons. And, not the least of which, I was not your typical kind of person running for office at the time. I had been, I went to law school. I was a lawyer, but I was a swimsuit model. I worked for the WWE. I'd done all these weird and crazy things that everybody thought before I ran, and I won. So I found myself in this crazy place called the state capitol, with everybody thinking I was one thing or another, but nobody really knowing what I was about. And I worked my butt off because I care about my district. I cared, to Jane's point, cared about the issues, care about having people treated fairly, care about people having the best opportunities, whether they be education, socioeconomically, every opportunity, everybody should have the same opportunity, and they should do their best with that opportunity. I was fortunate, and from a lot of hard work, I, worked my way up, and I became the first and only woman House Republican leader. And, as Jason mentioned to you, in 2017, we had a tie in the Senate and almost, a 4-vote difference in the House. And what happens when you have those close numbers with Republicans and Democrats is good things get done, right? We passed the first bipartisan budget ever. And the reason we passed that year was because, and Jason will acknowledge this, the Democrats had large majorities for many years. They passed their budgets, and, the minority party puts out their budget, and we get a few things we want. And then, everybody goes off, on their merry way. But that year we had to have very serious conversations about issues and what mattered. And because of that, we have a spending cap and a bonding cap and a volatility cap in Connecticut. And that's the large reason why we have a flush rainy day fund, and we have a balanced budget, and we have extra money and a surplus. So, those are
All right, thank you. George.
Yeah, so my parents immigrated from Guatemala, Central America. And I was born in New Haven, raised in inner city New Haven. My parents believed in American dream. And, although we grew up from very humble economic beginnings, my childhood growing up probably a little different than Themis and Jane's, but that is the beauty of our nation, right? We all are given a fair chance as long as we work hard, and we're given the opportunity to succeed. So I certainly was fortunate that I had two great parents. I grew up in the local Boys and Girls Club and YMCA, and my parents told me that education was the way out of the inner city, the way out of the ghetto, and I believed them. I was good in math and science, and I never heard of an engineer that didn't have a job. So I figured that would be the route to go. I got into Trinity College. I got to tell you, I went to Notre Dame High School in West Haven, right? Definitely good school. But when I got into Trinity, I felt like I hit the jackpot. I got to go to, I thought was an upper echelon school, and it didn't disappoint. I met folks from all kinds of walks of life. I got to major in engineering, even though it was a liberal arts school. I met all kinds of people, and it prepared me more than anything else. It prepared me for the real world. Now, once I graduated, I got my job, started my family. I knew that it was important for me to give back to the community, give back to the state that gave so much to me. So while I was at Trinity, I had opportunities to volunteer. Once I graduated, I also volunteered in different organizations. And after, about 20 years of that or so, I had my own kids, my own children. Hunter, who graduated from Emerson College in a couple years ago. My daughter Tracy's graduating in May from Iona University, which is great. But when my kids were in high school, I thought, looking around, and other parents were telling me that their kids who were a little older were leaving the state of Connecticut, going to different parts of the country, and they had to go see their kids in places like Texas and Florida and California and other places. And I thought, we need to do something here in Connecticut to help improve our economy. And then I looked around to see who was representing us at the local, state, and federal level. And I said, you know what? We are a state of millions of people. Why do we keep sending the same people to Hartford at that time to represent us? So I thought, well, you know what? More people out of the political sphere have to throw their hat in the ring. So I gave it a shot, and I managed to, win on my first go at it. And, it was a wonderful experience in the state legislature. But my whole goal is just to give back to the community, and selfishly as well, in terms of help to improve Connecticut's economy so that young people like my children could do what my wife and I were able to do in terms of raise a family, have a career in Connecticut, and be able to buy a home and raise their own family, that sort of thing.
Now, thanks. And I'll just quickly share my story because everyone's got a great story. My parents migrated here from Puerto Rico when they were teenagers. My dad just came to pick tobacco to find a job here. My mom was trying to get away from a very, very overbearing mom, or my grandma at the time. And luckily they met here in Hartford, and I was born in East Hartford, born and raised. And I didn't go to Trinity for my undergrad. I went to University of Connecticut, but then ended up here at Trinity. I've been here for 16 years now, and it's been a really amazing and special opportunity for me to be a part of the Trinity family. Sorry, I got muted there for a second. But yeah, I had no intentions of running for the state legislature. I grew up wanting to be the mayor of East Hartford, mayor of my hometown, and it was really grounded in community service, right? I was big into community service as a middle school student, as a high school student. My wife, we met in high school. She likes to say I was a politician since high school because I was that guy that would talk to anybody, who would reach out to people and talk to them and try to engage them. And, by then I was president of everything, president of student council, president of this club, president of that club. Here I am. So I wanted to be mayor, grew up wanting to be mayor. And like Themis, Melody Curry, who was a state representative at the time and kind of my PTO mom, she had known me since I was a kid, called me up and said, hey, this seat is opening up. I think you should run. I said, I don't know anything about it. I'm a little nervous about doing it. Let me talk to my wife. She's like, yeah, that's fine, but you're running. And here I am, I'm now in my 8th term, 15 years later, which is quite an amazing opportunity and a privilege to be able to serve in the legislature. So I want to thank Kenneth for putting a question into the Q&A. I would encourage others who are watching us to submit some questions into the Q&A. We can get those into the rotation. But I'll move on to our second question and begin with Jane. Jane, is bipartisanship dead? And when you think about answering that question, answer it from kind of your observations of the world, but probably more importantly from your own personal experience.
Yeah, so bipartisanship is not dead, but it's not alive everywhere. I think it's very hard from what I've observed for folks to work in a bipartisan way at the federal level right now. And I think that is actually one of the most significant generational challenges for those of us, which should be everyone who care about our democracy. Interestingly, in Massachusetts, we just had our Republican governor leave office of his own decision, and he, for a very long time, over almost 2 terms, was the most popular governor in America as a Republican. He worked with an overwhelmingly Democratic state legislature, and his predecessor, Governor Healy, has kept a lot of not his top folks, right? So not his cabinet secretaries, but many of his sort of key folks, a couple layers down, and openly talks about how she agrees with many things that he did. And so even though there's today an overwhelming Democratic majority in the legislature and a sweep that happened, and Democrats now hold every office, constitutional office in Massachusetts, you can still feel a commitment to bipartisanship. And certainly at the local level, we see a commitment to working on problems more than finding things to fight about. And so I have a theory that there are a lot of reasons for the sad state of affairs at the federal level, including, frankly, I'll tell a story. I ran for Congress in 1996. It's the only race that I lost. And I don't know why my response to losing a race and not having a job, and I'm not wealthy, I was not wealthy, I was much less wealthy then coming out of public service, was to go and buy a lot of new pillows. I replaced every pillow in our small house in North Adams, but I was checking out at now you're gonna know I'm not rich. I was checking out at the Sears where I was buying my pillows, and the woman who was buying my pillows saw my credit card, and she said to me, "Oh, I was heartbroken. I loved you as our state senator, and I almost voted for you. But I couldn't see sending you to Washington to work for Bill Clinton." In her mind, a member of Congress worked for the president. And so this thought about how people vote down ballot and the ways that people do or don't split their ballot, I think is fascinating, and how frankly, people will vote for one party at the state level, but at times will not vote for them. And I hope this isn't painful for them when they run for federal office. I can almost say that without PTSD now, because I don't like to lose. But one of the things that my theory is that in order to have bipartisanship, and frankly, just to make government run in a society where the velocity of change is so fast, people are unmoored because of how quickly things are changing. I mean, 2 years ago, pre-COVID, would any of us ever have done an event like this on Zoom? No, we would have all hauled ourselves to Trinity. You would have had far fewer events, would have had to be done when we could all be on campus. There's parts of that I miss, and we're starting to get back to doing some of it, but technology just keeps changing so rapidly, and that unsettles people as much as it creates opportunity. And so for government to respond and society to respond in a really unsettled atmosphere, you have to have trust. And the farther away government is from you, the harder it is to build trust and to maintain trust. And so that's one of my theories of why we can maintain bipartisanship at the local and state level while having a complete shit show. I don't know if I'm supposed to swear, but it's the best description I can come up with at the federal level in terms of figuring out a way to do the people's business in a collaborative manner.
Thanks for that, Jane. Themis and George, I don't know if you want to add anything quickly to that based on your experiences. I mean, I can tell you in my experience in the legislature, at least in Connecticut, I offer this statistic all the time, but in any given year, I'd say between 80 and 85% of the legislation that comes out of the Connecticut General Assembly is unanimous or near unanimous. Now, granted, the 10 to 15% of the things, they're the big issues right there. Taxes, their criminal justice, their social issues. But at the end of the day, Democrats and Republicans are really working together almost all the time. And I think George and Themis can speak to this too, particularly at the committee level. There's a lot of give and take. But 85% of the time, we're voting together to enact policy that is moving the state of Connecticut forward. And that gives me some hope. And I don't want to sugarcoat it. Things get tough at times. And I don't want to talk about the federal level. Jane noted on that. I don't know what to do about the federal level. There's probably too much money in politics. And Connecticut is a little bit different in that we have public financing. But I still have a lot of hope for our ability to work together as Democrats, Republicans, Independent, Working Family, Green Party, whatever it might be.
Well, Jason, I mean, we've been saying for years in Hartford that, we sit there in Connecticut and look down what's going on in Washington. And it's not just now, it's for several years. It's just happened to have gotten much worse lately. And say, oh my gosh, I could never be down there because I don't know how they even operate. Then of course I run for federal office and George runs for federal office. And, it's a little scary because we do. I mean, it is 85% of the bills, 90% of the bills, but you're right. 10% of the bills that we don't agree on are the big things, right? Like how to spend the money, or should we take more money out of your pocket, or, the stuff that we really brawl about. But I think most importantly, and I mentioned this earlier, we did that bipartisan budget in 2017, which was, my most proud moment in that building. But most importantly, we all talk, right? We go out there. I mean, the former Speaker of the House, Joris Simowitz, and I, when I was leader last, 2 years ago, we would always say that, and some people would criticize us for being friends because we were friends, because I respected that he had opinions. I just didn't agree with all his opinions. And I respected that he had a job to do and he knew that I had a job to do. And same with Marty Looney. And we went out there and we fought and we brawled and we did what we had to do. And we fought about the issues, right? We didn't fight about the personalities. We didn't say, you're right, I'm wrong, therefore you're a horrible person. That's what goes on in Washington, in my opinion. I'm a Republican, you're a Democrat. That means you're a bad person, you're a horrible person, and I can't even talk to you. And that if that's where you're starting from, you're never going to get anywhere else. And I think we're seeing in Washington, where even say, just use the Republican Party for a second, the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans are in two totally different places for the most part. I think the House and the Senate Democrats are in similarly different places. I just think the disparity on the Republican side is a little bit more. So I think there's a lot of hope for bipartisanship because we've done it. And we have the relationships and the respect for each other to have those conversations. And we may not get there all the time, but we'll get there a lot more than we don't get there.
Yeah, and I would like to add that having parity, whether it's in the House or in the Senate, helps a lot. When folks are forced to work together and to find common ground, as Themis pointed out and Jane pointed out, a lot of good things can happen. So that's why I was excited to be part of the Senate and the state legislature in 2017, and to be part of making the Senate tie happen, right? I didn't really truly fully appreciate it as much until after the fact, right? Because I was brand new to the legislature. Everything was new for me. And so as far as a bipartisan budget or working together, it just felt like that's the way it should be all the time. But for folks like Themis and Jason, you guys know that that wasn't always the case. So for me, it was a pleasure and a privilege to be a part of that part of state history.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. We're going to get to some of the questions in the Q&A that are being submitted by our guests here. And so to what degree do you have to deal with colleagues who engage in kind of in sharing or perpetuating conspiracy theories about one thing or another related to government and or politics? Who wants to try to take that question?
I mean, I can start first. I mean, I would just say, one, try to stay above the fray, right? And what I use to ground myself are the people that I meet on the street, every day in my community, whether I was a candidate or when I was in the state Senate. And try to stay focused on the things that people are most concerned with in the street, right? Most concerned with things like jobs and being able to pay their bills and their children's education. And so I try to do my best to work across the aisle. I think I had that reputation of working across the aisle, Jason. Hopefully you felt that way when I was there. And I just try to be true to what my parents taught me growing up and what I learned through my education at Notre Dame High School in West Haven and at Trinity College. And just try to be fair and treat everyone equal and the same. So again, try to stay. I just do my best to stay away from the extremes of not stay away, but from following into the sort of thinking or political path of the extremes of both parties, finding common ground and pushing that forward. I think that's the way to attract the most people. But I also try not to insult anyone on either side of the spectrum. Even though I consider myself a moderate, I never tried to be disparaging in any way to folks who are either on the far left or very conservative. We all have to work together, and everyone has something to offer. And I try to focus on those good points, try to keep things positive, and most importantly, give everyone that I was either trying to represent as a candidate or that I did represent as a state senator, give folks hope and inspire folks to want to stay involved and to want to do things that are going to help our community.
All right.
Jason, can I just add a quick thing? I agree with George, but sometimes you have to demand that respect, right? Sometimes just being respectful doesn't mean you get respect in return. And I, just speaking as a House Minority Leader, it wasn't always, not you, but it wasn't always that the minority party got that respect because we have less people. So sometimes the majority party will say, well, we can do whatever we want. So, we're just going to do what we want and pat you on the head and off you go. And George, I was just thinking about oftentimes George and I would be at events in our district and somebody would say something that might have been disrespectful to the Republican Party in the minority. And I would immediately, my fire would rise and George would recognize it and he'd be hitting me and poking me in the leg saying, take a deep breath, take a deep breath. And of course I didn't because that's not what I was known for. But it's because for me, it was about everybody getting respect. And as leader of my caucus, I had to demand respect for not just me, but everybody in that caucus. And once we had that, then we can have those conversations and then we can be fair and open and try and come to the best conclusions. But sometimes it's not just enough to be nice to somebody else. You have to make the point that if you don't show that respect, there will be consequences.
So I actually think this is a tremendously important issue for an academic institution like Trinity, and probably one of the most difficult issues that you have to grapple with. So conspiracy theories, and I'll tie this to another question that's in the chat, do you go on shows of these networks that are focused on a particular, to cater to people with certain beliefs, right? Fox News, etc. And our biggest danger right now as a society is that people will only talk to other people they agree with them. And I'm going to just say two things. First of all, many academic institutions dismiss that this is a problem on college campuses. Trinity has had to deal with this in this last academic year, and I think has dealt with it pretty well. Free speech is really, really hard and critically important to maintain. Having said that, to Themis's point, we need to teach folks how to challenge ideas without being disrespectful, how to critically think. I mean, this is what education is all about. And with the rise of technology, things like ChatGPT, it is getting harder and harder to figure out what is real and what is manufactured. And so it's more important than ever that our academic institutions allow students the freedom and the safety to discuss really difficult issues without having to be perfect, without having to be politically correct all of the time, but to really discuss, how do you discern fact from manufactured facts? Because I have not met I did not meet a lot of people when I was in politics 20 years ago spreading conspiracy theories, but there also was no Twitter. There were no, bots. There was no social media. All of those things exist and they're not going away. And so we have to figure out ways that our children and society can discern, how to have intellectual and well-informed debates, discern what's real and what's not. And then the last thing I will say, my priest, and you can see, like, I'm even nervous to say that I go to church, right? Like, that shouldn't be in today's day and age. When I was in public office, even back 20 years ago, I hardly ever mentioned that I was a practicing Catholic, because I knew that if I said I was a practicing Catholic, that people would have certain beliefs in their head. If, oh, you're a Republican, a practicing Catholic, that makes you something. And I was not many of those things, but people get stereotypes in their mind. So I just didn't talk about my faith. I do a little more now with my gray hair. It gives me a little more permission. But my priest, to get back to my point, had this really interesting discussion about our divided society. And for those of you who are willing to listen to advice that comes secondhand from a priest, he said, a lot of times when you talk to people who disagree with you, you do it to persuade them. What's really important sometimes is just to talk to people who disagree with you to understand them. And that is something you can tell already, right? Like, I have a hard time stopping talking and stopping trying to get you to believe what I'm saying. But I have tried to practice that, because even within my own party, at times or people who have voted for people in my party that I haven't been able to bring myself to support. And it's been really difficult, but important for me to try to understand, what is it that is driving people to embrace certain ideas that are either untrue or are so far beyond what I would ever accept. Because if we don't understand how they got there, we're never going to be able to solve how we put this thing back together.
No, thank you everybody for those answers. All right, I'm going to get to some more questions because the clock is ticking quickly. We're Democrats and Republicans on this webinar. Does the independent party fit into the future political climate of Connecticut or state level politics? If so, how? And if not, why? Independent party has a role?
Sure. I mean, I'll answer that. I would say yes, absolutely. I think third parties like the Independent Party and Libertarian Party, I think they help to keep the two major parties, Democrats and Republicans, on their toes. This is democracy, and the people speak. And if there are certain groups of folks who feel that the independent parties for them, so be it. You look at Connecticut, and as a state, I think we're above 40% of all the registered voters are just not affiliated with any party at all. So some folks are looking for other options. And I think it's a healthy thing. I think it drives Republicans and Democrats, to do more to, earn, the vote and earn membership from those folks in our state who are looking to join a political party.
I think also, George and I have both gotten independent party endorsements in our career. It's interesting because there are some people that will not vote for you if you're a Republican or if you're a Democrat. But if you're on the ballot as, just in our example, a Republican and the independent line, they're like, okay, I can vote for independent because I like her, I like him, but I can't vote for them if they're Republican, which I think is just a very sad state of affairs in this country. And that's a whole nother conversation. But I think it's important to allow people to identify with who they're identifying. If they identify they don't want to be a Republican, they don't want to be a Democrat, then they shouldn't, right? I mean, in Connecticut, we're close to 50% that they're actually registered unaffiliated. And that's why it's interesting that when you talk about, oh, if you're a Republican in Connecticut and you run for office and, you know, these Republicans will vote for you and these Republicans won't vote for you, or vice versa on the Democrat side, forget that. It's the independent people that you need to get to vote for you, or you're not going to win a statewide race, right? I mean, if you have almost 50% of registered voters in one block, those are the people you have to get to. And in a state like Connecticut, it's different than a state like Alabama, for example, because a Republican here is going to look different than a Republican there. And those independent voters are going to be the ones that really change. You need your own party, of course, but you need to make sure that you appeal to the voters of the state you're living in. And so I think the independent party has the potential to be very helpful in that regard going forward.
Well, thanks. All right, we're gonna move on to our next one. Well, I'll read this one, and we have a student who's joined us this evening from Trinity College, and I'll read his message verbatim. First off, I want to say hi to my beautiful aunt, Themis. I think you can know who it is, Themis. I also want to say hello to my good friend George. Kate, I won't hold it against you that you didn't say hello to me or Jane. But regarding a question, if you could tell yourself something when you were a senior in college regarding your future, what would it be?
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to try different things. Don't be afraid to go different places. Don't be afraid to fail. You know, really kind of go with what your gut says. What the decision you make at 21 and 22 doesn't affect the rest of your life, or it may affect the rest of your life. If you make a mistake, you can try something else. You know, I mean, I wish that I listened to that more. If I was more of a, you know, I have to make the right decision. And if I don't make the right decision, then it's going to mess up the rest of my life and the whole plan you have. And, you know, we all kind of get stuck in that thought process when we're 20, 21, 22. But, you know, just pick something you're interested in. You know, it may work out, it may not, you know, and then you try something else, because now's the time to do it. But don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to fail, because failure is what allows you to learn what works for you and what doesn't work for you.
George, were you going to answer?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, one, I would tell myself, I should have maybe paid a little bit more attention to politics when I was younger. When I was at Trinity, no one that knew me at Trinity would ever say that I was politically inclined at the time. My whole goal, again, was to graduate with an engineering degree and get a job. But I also would say that I had a very narrow in terms of career vision and path when I was at Trinity. And what Trinity actually taught me, certainly how to becoming an engineer, and gave me all of those tools to do that. But it really was more of the life lesson, the life tools that I utilized, not only just to be a good engineer, but to learn how to work on a team and to communicate with other folks who perhaps, for example, in my case, who aren't engineers, so I can get the funding to do the projects that I want to do. All those sorts of things I found gave me a bit of an advantage over other engineers that were just focused just on the math and science, but didn't have those sort of social management, people skills. The people skills are so important, and I certainly, I naturally gravitated to the people skills, but I could have focused on that even more, because I think that has played the biggest role in my, if you want to call it that, success in my 54 years of life.
Jane, you want to offer a response to it?
Sure. I would just say follow your passions. I have a daughter is a senior at Trinity, another daughter just finished at Northwestern, and an older daughter, all these ages. And I find this generation is so focused on what's the right thing to do. And what I have found, and I think Themis and Georgie both alluded to this, right? If you do those things you love, that's where you're going to find the greatest rewards and the greatest success. And so find your passion and your purpose and pursue that relentlessly.
And I'll just add quickly, I have 3 things that I'll share quickly. I spoke to a Trinity class the other evening. They asked me the same question. I said, don't overplan and don't stick to whatever plan it is you think you have at the moment, because you'll likely miss opportunities that will present themselves. And if you don't allow yourself to deviate from your plan, you'll miss those opportunities. 2, read to find your news instead of watching to find your news. I've read a newspaper every day for the last 25 years. And I think I'm better off for it. And I think we need more people to read for news. And then lastly, if you're going to go to grad school, do it before you have children, because both my wife and I were having children and trying to go to grad school, and it was a traumatizing experience. So that's my advice for anybody who's a senior today. We'll get to another question. How do we get both parties to move beyond cultural politics and define success as collaboration? How do we move beyond the cultural politics?
Sure. Well, I'll start. One, that's partly why I threw my hat in the ring to try to represent Connecticut down in Congress. I just think if folks that are in these elected positions, if they're not getting it done, we've got to elect people who are going to do that. We have to elect people who are going to be bipartisan, who are really going to listen to views of folks who agree with them, but also may not agree with them as well, and understand that everyone has something to offer. So I think we just need to, in my opinion, change the tenor, whether it's here in Connecticut or whether it's down in Washington, to get people that are going to do what I think the majority of us, at least in here in Connecticut, my sense is they want to see their elected officials, regardless of party, work together to solve our common problems.
If you don't change the people, if you don't like the result, if you keep the same people, you're going to get the same result, right? And, going back to Connecticut, we're Republicans in Connecticut, which are going to be different than Republicans in Alabama, which will be different than Republicans in Texas. But in Washington, everybody needs to work together. And, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party shouldn't be a homogeneous party. It should be a party made up of different ideas and different thoughts. And because George and I might be down there and have one opinion, and then people from another part of the country would think we have, horns on our head that we could say such a thing. But it's important for our state, right? It's important to represent who you represent. And that's what we would be doing. And that's what they're doing. And so it's important to change the people that are giving you the result that you don't like. And I think that there's no time we've seen that as much as now.
Okay.
So there are fixed elections where the issues that are going to determine what we vote on, there's been a ton of research on this, are pretty well set. If there's a big recession, if we're in the middle of a war, and then there are more fluid elections where the folks who are running can have more sway, and those who are spending money in the elections can help to drive what the issues are. I'm going to say something a little bit controversial. And I think both them and George and you as well, Jason, alluded to this. Voters can't get off the hook here, right? Like whether it's reading newspapers, going out and discerning what's real versus what's false, thinking through who you're voting for, deciding to run yourself. But, it's not like some amorphous force from some other galaxy comes down and says, ye shall all only pay attention to the cultural issues. Like we decide as Americans, what are those things that we're going to pay attention to? So, don't get caught up in it, right? Go pay attention to the less sexy, less glamorous, tedious issues like, how many people on this call know that at the federal level today, we are now paying more in interest on the debt than our entire gross domestic product? Like that is a terrible thing. So we can scream and yell about inflation all we want. Part of the reason we have inflation is because we're spending too much damn money. And listen, every single thing we spend money on has a constituency group. Every single thing we spend money on has some very sweet person that you can find, right? Even the billions in federal, like they all have people who want to support it. But when you start like really cutting down to like the pocketbook issues that are driving people need to be better educated. I don't know, maybe we need to make everybody take an economics course, but I mean, we are in deep trouble with some of the actual issues going on in Washington, and even the debates on those issues are very surface. People have to take responsibility for educating themselves and reading, you know, more deeply about what the actual issues are, and not responding to the sort of dog whistle type high level, oh, you just hate old people, you know, that's why you're making that proposal, or, you know, you're just a bad person who doesn't like children, whatever those, like, I always tell my kids, if you hear somebody talking about politics and they say something that sounds so 100% true that you can't think of a single argument against it, then you just have not actually done enough homework, because there is not a single issue I've ever encountered that is 100% to zero in terms of how clear cut it is.
No, I want to agree with you, Jane, about not letting the voter off the hook, the citizens off the hook. I mean, it's real easy to blame politicians for all the problems in the world. I get it. And rightfully so, we should be held to a higher level and higher expectations. At the same time, voters actually need to be responsible as well for a lot of these things and informing themselves about the issues, but also getting involved in the campaign and holding their elected officials accountable. And that means emailing us, calling us, sliding into our DMs on social media, whatever you got to do. Making your voice heard to us so that we're responsive to you, I think, is an important responsibility of the average voter out there, and something that they have to do.
And they drive media coverage. I mean, media is just money.
What surprised you about being in politics, and what has disappointed you?
I'll start and I'll be brief. When I first ran, I had somebody who told me I would be shocked by the people I had never met who would show up and would give untold hours to support me, and that absolutely came true, and have become some of my closest friends 30 years later. He told me I would also be disappointed by people who had been lifelong friends, and I would expect just wouldn't come to my side, and they wouldn't for a variety of different reasons. So on balance, running for political office will redeem your faith in mankind. It did for me. It was harder to get there in the race that I lost. But if you look at the people who show up to make our system effectively run and help fuel campaigns, there's a lot to feel good about.
George?
Yeah, I would say the, the whole campaigning aspect of it, in terms of the personal attacks and the lies. I mean, I knew it was coming and it was to be expected, but the level of those types of attacks is very disappointing. I had political insiders just doing blatant lies. I remember my last campaign, towards the end, they were putting out commercials saying that a vote for me was going to eliminate their Social Security and their Medicaid, and I'm like, hey, what are you talking about? My mom's on Social Security, I mean, those kinds of things. I had people on election day coming up to me and say, George, but just tell me, do you really want to eliminate Social Security? So having that kind of negative vibe, because in life, if you're not in politics, right, in life, people that throw those types of negative vibes or just outright lies about you, you kind of, you just remove them from your life, right? You don't hang around with them anymore. You shy away from them. But in politics, you can't do that. So it forces you to have a tougher skin, and that's why it's very important to have a foundation in your beliefs. I'm a practicing Catholic. I was raised Catholic, and I oftentimes go to my my base and my beliefs, and you got to think that, hey, okay, you're doing this for a for a greater cause, right? For the community. And you just have to withstand those types of attacks and lies. So for me, that was very disappointing, and something that's very difficult to to get used to. But in politics, and Jason, you've been doing this a lot longer than I have, and Themis as well, and Jane, it's definitely something that it's hard for and I consider myself a regular or average person that's relatively new to politics to get used to.
George, you're not new anymore. So you can stop saying that. But in all seriousness, we're all regular people, right? We all started out that way, and it was a shocking thing. I mean, I had mentioned before that when I ran my first race for the state house, it was a horrible, horrible experience. Not the experience of running, but just the things that happened to me, the things people saying, how it became public, how it was on TV and the news all the time. And I remember one day I went to my parents and I said, I can't believe that this is what's happening. Like, I know they tell you this is what's going to happen, but this is bad. I mean, and it objectively was worse than most people at that level, right? And I said, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. And this was maybe April and the election was in November. And my parents said, listen, if you decided you don't want to run because you just decided you've been doing this for a couple months, you really don't want to do it anymore, then that's one thing. But if you don't want to run because they're getting to you and what people are doing to you, that's not how we raised you. So you have to find a way to suck it up here, because, you have your family, you have your friends, and it's going to be bad. But that's because they're afraid of you, right? If they weren't threatened, if they didn't think you could win, they wouldn't care. They wouldn't spend 2 seconds on you. So I try and go back to that part in my head every time somebody says something bad about me. But, like my first year I ran, my parents got death threats about me to them. I mean, and your parents and your kids and your family, like when they have to be involved, and it's bad enough you decide you're doing this, but, when your family's involved, and your family's going to be involved, at one point or the other. My sister then subsequently ran for the House. We needed a bunch of seats in the House, and when I was leader, so I convinced her to run. And, she went through a similar thing, not as bad as I went through it. But even now, when things go wrong, I say to her, Nicole, even within the caucus, there'll be members that don't like a bill she has or something she said, the typical things that happen within your own people. I said, Nicole, you just have to decide if you're doing this because you feel it in your heart and your gut and you have a passion for it, then you have to keep doing it. You have to tell other people. I respect that you don't agree with it, but it's something I feel strongly about. And I think that's really what happens at the end of the day. People disappoint you and people will talk about you and horrible things will be said. But we all do this, I believe, for the right reasons, because we have a passion to help people and change the state, your town, the country, the world. And as long as you can still say that's why you're doing it, you should keep doing it. And you have to somehow find a way to put that stuff out of your mind.
And I'll just say, because there was somebody asking if they should run, the smartest people I've ever worked with in state government, like the people who work for me in the governor's office, many of whom still work in state government, dedicated, hardworking, defy all stereotypes, right? And have worked for governors of both parties, have worked for, really super, super great, smart people, some of the best leadership experiences in my life. And if you want to change things or help people, there is no better place to do that. And also you can get a tremendous amount of autonomy and authority as a young person. So there's lots of great things that you can do and that can happen to you by participating in the political process. And if you don't, only the bad people are left.
So yeah, one more question that's been sent in by an audience member, and I've only run at the state level, but the three of you have run at the federal level. So the question is what are the chances of ever getting big money out of federal elections?
I have so I supported John McCain in a bunch of elections, but I have a controversial opinion on this. So, and I think by that what people mean is, so every time we've tried to reform campaign finance, we've made it worse. Because number one, we give great advantage to rich people because you cannot limit speech. And when you limit what individuals can give, all you do is you just drive power to other people. I understand why some people like public financing. I believe that, first of all, just like water runs downhill, money, until the media start giving free time on TV until small little print shops can start printing up your, things that you hand out for free. It's just not going to happen. What's important is disclosure and transparency. And as long as you have disclosure and transparency, so everybody knows, and that's what we don't have right now. And the reason we don't have it is because we tried to reform campaign finance so many times and stop having money in the system. And so people just found another way. Water runs downhill. Every time we try to reform it, the money goes into darker crevices where super rich people who can figure out ways to hide how they do it and find loopholes in the tax system. It is not going to happen. Just let people give money to campaigns. It's the hardest freaking thing I've ever done, is to go out and ask people to give me money, but it forced me to justify my positions, ask for things, and to be a good candidate, and then make me disclose it. Disclose it all the time. We have the technology now. Disclose it on the day they give it to you. I don't care, but don't think you can take money out of politics. You can't. That's maybe controversial, but I think it's true.
You know, for many years in the Connecticut House and Senate, we fought for public financing, and we stopped it for many years, and then it finally passed. And at the time, our maximum donation per person was $250 per person. And I always said that at $250 per person, if my vote can be bought for $250, I have much bigger problems than being in office and campaign finance stuff. So, you know, we went to the public financing where taxpayers pay for your elections, was a whole nother problem. I firmly believe in just sunshine along the way. And if I am getting money from an organization that you don't like, then you either don't vote for me or you call me and say, why did you take money from XYZ? And we can have a conversation about it. And I believe in an instant disclosure too. I mean, you shouldn't have to wait till the end of the quarter, so every 3 months, to figure out who took money from me, because isn't that what it's about, right? We believe in freedom of speech, and we believe that people should be able to express their political beliefs and give money to people. So I believe that we should be able to give money, and we shouldn't be limiting that. But I believe that the public should have instant availability and be able to see and then make your decision, because it all goes back to what we were saying before. Voters have to educate themselves. They cannot say, oh, I didn't vote, or I just didn't know who to vote for, so I just voted for these people, and then complain for the next 2 or 4 years as to what's going on in Connecticut or Washington or any other state. It's your obligation to educate yourself. And part of that education is to see who gave people money. But by the artificial tamping down of the contributions, that doesn't stop anything. I mean, Jane's right. I mean, it closes one hole, but other holes just burst right open. And the money's going to get there one way or the other. So.
All right, we're running short on time. I'll throw one last question out to all of you. What's one thing we should all be hopeful for politics going forward?
Honesty.
Yeah, absolutely. More transparency and getting the younger people inspired enough to get more involved.
Yeah, I have great hopes for this younger generation. They're very volunteer focused, and if we can convince them that should also be politics focused, I think we're in a good place.
I think that's a perfect way to end this. It's 8 o'clock on the nose. I want to thank Jane and Themis and George for participating today, and certainly for everyone in the audience for being active participants. We had some questions, softball questions I was going to ask the panelists, but instead we got to everybody who submitted a question in the Q&A, and I think it made for a far more vibrant and lively discussion. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to my colleagues here for participating, and hope everybody has a good night.
Thank you, Jason.
Good job, Jason. Thank you.